The sovereign galactic conclave had been watching Earth for 63 years before they decided to make contact. Not because they were cautious, not because they were afraid, because they were bored, and a primitive species stumbling through its own solar system with chemical propellant weapons and wheeled war machines was the kind of entertainment the conclave's upper council liked to enjoy with their evening meals. Ambassador Veth Corral descended from his diplomatic vessel onto the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base on a Tuesday in October, and his first recorded words to humanity were not a greeting. They were a laugh. He stood 6 feet tall, thin as a wire, with 4 arms folded at different angles and eyes the color of cooling metal. His translator implant rendered his language into flat, perfect English, and what he said, looking out at the line of M1 Abrams tanks positioned as a ceremonial honor guard along the runway, was this: "You brought your toys." The American general standing at the front of the welcoming committee, a woman named Margaret Osei, who had spent 31 years moving armor across deserts and mountains and frozen European plains, did not react. She had been briefed. She smiled, shook 2 of Veth Corral's 4 hands, and said, "Welcome to Earth. Ambassador." The conclave's opening position in every diplomatic contact with a new species was dominance, not hostile, just obvious. The way a grown adult is obvious when they walk into a room full of children playing with wooden swords. They didn't threaten. They observed, commented, cataloged weaknesses, and filed their reports. Their technology was centuries ahead. Their energy weapons could atomize a tank from orbit. Their ships moved between star systems in weeks. They had absorbed 41 species into their conclave, some willingly, most not quite, and none of them had shown up to first contact with machines that ran on diesel fuel and fired solid metal projectiles at velocities that the conclave's scientists found genuinely nostalgic, in the way people find fossils nostalgic. The summit lasted 3 days. Veth Corral toured a military installation, watched a live fire exercise, and at one point stood 50 meters from an Abrams firing its main gun at a target a 1.5 miles away and reduced it to a crater that you could park a bus in. He clapped, 2 of his 4 hands, a polite, patronizing applause that his staff mirrored. "Magnificent percussion," he said. "You have mastered the art of throwing rocks very fast." General Osei, standing beside him, said nothing. She was thinking about something different. She was thinking about the terrain reports her analysts had filed after reviewing every piece of footage the conclave had released of their ground engagements on other worlds. She was thinking about how every single one of those engagements had taken place in open, flat environments or inside urban structures that their energy weapons carved through like butter. She was thinking about how the conclave's ground forces, the Veth-class infantry units, were designed for clean environments, much stable gravity, controlled atmospheric pressure. She was thinking about mud. The conclave's formal proposal arrived on the 4th day. It was not aggressive. It was administrative. The conclave would extend its governance framework to Earth. Humanity would join as a member species under conclave law. Trade agreements, technology sharing, access to interstellar travel. In exchange, Earth's militaries would be decommissioned, its weapons catalogued, its defense apparatus dissolved. Protection Force, conclave managed, would handle planetary security. The UN Security Council deliberated for 18 days. Their answer was no. Veth Corral received the rejection with the same expression he had worn watching the tank fire. Faint amusement. He relayed the response to the conclave high command and attached his own assessment, which circulated widely in conclave diplomatic channels and was eventually leaked to human intelligence services by a sympathetic species who had been watching the situation with increasing nervousness. His assessment said, "The humans are sentimental about their primitive weapons. This is a cultural attachment, not a strategic consideration. Their ground forces are equipped with technology several centuries behind conclave standard." Their most advanced tank, a vehicle they call the Abrams, has effective range of approximately 4,000 meters, fires a kinetic penetrator at roughly 1,700 meters per second, and requires a crew of 4 biological operators. It is loud, visible on all sensor arrays, and produces a thermal signature detectable from low orbit. Their entire armor doctrine is built around a piece of equipment that any Conclave automated defense platform could eliminate before the crew heard the engagement alarm. They will capitulate within 1 standard campaign cycle. Recommend minimal force deployment to avoid unnecessary resource expenditure. He recommended 3 Veth-class ground divisions and 1 orbital fire support platform. The High Command approved 2 and told him that should be more than sufficient. The Conclave fleet arrived in Earth orbit 11 months later, on a Friday, in late spring, when the ground in Central Europe was soft from 3 weeks of rain, and the rivers in the Korean peninsula were running high and fast from snowmelt, and the dust in the Iraqi desert was the kind that got inside every seal, every joint, every sensor housing, and stayed there. General Osei, by then promoted to Supreme Allied Commander of the newly formed Earth Defense Coordination Force, was in a command bunker in an undisclosed location in the Swiss Alps. She was drinking coffee, real coffee. The black, no sugar, the kind that had been keeping soldiers functional since before the Conclave had invented their first energy weapon. She was looking at a map, not a digital display, a physical topographic map printed on actual paper, covered in handwritten annotations in 4 languages. Her aide came in and told her the Conclave fleet had assumed geosynchronous orbit. She nodded. She took a long drink of her coffee. "Tell the tank commanders to move to their Phase 1 positions," she said. "Yeah, and tell them to take the long route, the muddy one." The aide looked at the map, then back at her. "All of them?" "All of them," she said. Somewhere in orbit, Veth Karal was preparing his landing coordinates, reviewing his force disposition, and composing his preliminary victory report. He had written the first paragraph before the campaign began, because in his experience, the first paragraph never needed changing. He had never fought in mud. And he had never fought anything that weighed 68 tons and kept moving after you hit it. He had never fought anything that had been designed, from the first sketch on the first drawing board, with the specific and patient intention of surviving things that should have killed it. He would learn. The first Conclave landing craft touched down in the Rhine Valley at 0400 hours on a Saturday morning, in the rain, and the Veth-class infantry that poured out of it immediately sank to their knee joints in mud that the Conclave's pre-deployment environmental analysis had classified as manageable terrain. They were still recalibrating their footing when the first Abrams round hit the lead command vehicle from a distance of 3,200 meters, out of the dark, from a position that every Conclave sensor said was empty. The vehicle did not explode the way Conclave vehicles usually exploded. Clean, bright, vaporized. It crumpled. It folded in on itself like a fist had grabbed it from the inside and squeezed. The crew, automated systems, no biological operators, shut down in the impact because the kinetic force of a depleted uranium penetrator traveling at that velocity doesn't ask the vehicle's software for permission. Veth Karal received the damage report 20 seconds later. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he sent a query to his sensor operators. "What fired that?" The answer came back. Unknown. No energy signature. No targeting emissions. No launch flash on expected spectra. Reviewing thermal. The thermal review took 4 minutes because the Abrams thermal signature at combat range, in cold rain, against a background of warm European Earth, looked like exactly what the Conclave systems expected to see in an empty field. Rocks, dirt, temperature gradients, nothing worth a second scan. Veth Karal revised his preliminary victory report. He deleted the first paragraph and started over. The Conclave's doctrine for planetary pacification was built on a simple physics argument. If you can see it, you can kill it. If you can kill it before it reaches effective range, you never suffer a meaningful engagement. Their energy weapon platforms had a theoretical engagement envelope of 60 kilometers in open atmosphere, and their automated targeting systems could acquire, track, and eliminate a moving ground vehicle in under 2 seconds from the moment of detection. Their sensor arrays, thermal, electromagnetic, acoustic, gravimetric, were designed to find anything that moved, anywhere, under any conditions. The doctrine had worked 41 times. It failed on Earth for a reason so old that humanity had stopped thinking of it as technology. They had stopped thinking of it as anything special at all. It was just something you did, the way you put on a coat before going out in the cold. You hid, not from heat sensors with warm blankets, not from radar with radar-absorbing coatings that the conclave systems would have seen through in an afternoon. Humans hid the way they had been hiding since the first human army figured out that the tree line was better than the open field. They hid in terrain. They used the ground itself. They dug positions that put 60 centimeters of compacted earth and rock between the tank's thermal signature and the atmosphere above it, so that from orbit, from the air, from the conclave's drone platforms scanning the Rhine Valley at 200 meters altitude, what you saw was a hill, a riverbank, a demolished building, a tree line, until the gun fired. The gun fired and the muzzle blast was 130 decibels, and the thermal bloom was 5,000 degrees for approximately 1/10 of a second, and then the tank moved, and by the time the conclave's targeting systems had processed the flash and resolved a firing position, the Abrams was already backing into a new hide, trailing diesel exhaust that mixed with the rain and the mud smell and the general agricultural chaos of a European river valley in spring, and became, to every sensor the conclave had brought to this planet, indistinguishable from nothing in particular. The Veth-class infantry took 40% casualties in the first 6 hours of the Rhine Valley engagement. Veth Corral called for orbital fire support. This was where General Osei had spent most of her 18 months of preparation, not on the tanks. Everyone understood what the tanks could do, and she had spent her preparation on the question of what happens when the enemy stops playing ground engagement and reaches for the sky. The orbital fire support platform was a Conclave Type 7 Devastator, a weapon system that could deliver a focused energy strike with enough precision to hit a specific vehicle inside a city block without touching the buildings on either side. It had done exactly this on 4 previous planets. It was, by any reasonable military assessment, the answer to armor. You stop being impressed by tanks the moment you can kill them from space with a beam of coherent energy that they have no possible defense against, except that the Type 7 Devastator required a targeting solution, and targeting solutions required sensor data. And the Abrams tanks in the Rhine Valley were, by the time the Type 7 was tasked to the engagement, not where the sensor data said they were. They had moved. They had moved into urban terrain, and into the basements of buildings that the conclave systems correctly identified as concrete and steel civilian structures, behind and beneath and inside things that a devastator strike would certainly destroy, but would also absolutely constitute a war crime under conclave humanitarian conduct protocols, a set of regulations that the conclave's political leadership had signed with considerable ceremony and considerable public visibility, and which they were now staring at from the wrong side. The conclave's Judge Advocate General Department took 11 hours to issue a ruling on the Rhine Valley targeting request. In those 11 hours, the tanks kept moving. They moved the way they had been designed to move. Not fast. The Abrams is not fast. Not by any standard, not by human standards, and certainly not by the conclaves, but relentlessly, methodically. With the grinding, fuel-consuming, crew-exhausting persistence of a machine that was built to fight for days, not hours, and whose operators had been trained by militaries that understood attrition the way some cultures understand weather. You didn't stop it. You endured it. You made it expensive. Sergeant First Class Dominic Harare was commanding a tank platoon in the Ruhr Industrial Corridor when the Conclave's second ground wave landed. He had been awake for 31 hours. His gunner, a 24-year-old named Specialist Kemi Adeyinka from Lagos, had been awake for 33. His loader, Private First Class Tomasz Wierzbicki, had been eating a cold ration bar since before the engagement started and had not yet finished it. The Conclave's second wave came in better prepared. They had adjusted their sensor protocols, increased their drone coverage altitude to reduce the terrain masking effect, and deployed a forward sensor screen of automated ground units designed to flush hiding armor by forcing movement. Harare watched the sensor screen advance on his thermal display. A jury-rigged system, half Conclave technology acquired in the first days of the engagement, and half human electronics married together by a signals sergeant who had apparently been an electrical engineer before she enlisted. And he made a decision that no doctrine covered and no training had explicitly prepared him for, but that felt, in the bone-deep way that 31 sleepless hours of fighting produces clarity, completely obvious. He drove his tank straight at the sensor screen, not fast, not dramatically, at 12 kilometers per hour, which is roughly the speed of a determined jogger, in a straight line through a drainage ditch that put 2 meters of earthen bank between him and the Conclave drone coverage altitude until he was 200 meters from the nearest automated sensor unit. Then Specialist Adeyinka put a heat round through it, then the next one, then the one after that. The sensor screen had been designed to survive energy weapon fire from Conclave ground units, because friendly fire incidents were a documented problem in complex terrain. It had not been designed to survive a 120-millimeter high-explosive anti-tank round at 200 meters. That's because the engineers who built it had reviewed the weapons profiles of every military it might encounter and had collectively decided that no sane tactical doctrine would put a main battle tank that close to anything before firing. The minimum engagement range for an Abrams in its own tactical manual was listed as several hundred meters because beyond that range it was generally more survivable. There was no doctrine for what Harare did. It was not in any manual. And it worked because it was insane, and because the Conclave's automated systems had not been programmed to anticipate insane. They had not been programmed to anticipate a species that would drive a 68-ton vehicle at jogging pace directly into the enemy's face, at night, in the rain, in a drainage ditch, because the crew had been awake for 31 hours and were too tired for clever. Veth Karal's second wave stalled in the Ruhr the same way the first had stalled in the Rhine Valley. Had not destroyed, not routed, stalled, pressed into an engagement rhythm they had not designed for, fighting terrain that their mobility systems did not handle well, unable to get clean targeting solutions on armor that refused to stay still and refused to stay visible, and refused, most infuriatingly of all, to die in the clean and predictable way that the doctrine said it should. He sent his damage reports to High Command. He attached his updated assessment. The updated assessment no longer mentioned the word primitive. It used a different word, one that did not translate cleanly into English but carried a meaning somewhere between unexpectedly durable and philosophically committed to not dying, and it recommended the immediate deployment of 4 additional ground divisions, full sensor recalibration, new targeting protocols for complex terrain, and a formal review of the engagement doctrine for species with what he now classified as unconventional attrition capacity. High Command read the report. They approved the additional divisions. They also, for the first time in 42 planetary pacification campaigns, asked a question that had never needed asking before. How many of their tanks are left? The answer took 3 days to compile. Because every time a Conclave reconnaissance unit thought it had counted and cataloged a unit, the unit moved or a new unit appeared from a position that previous scans had identified as empty. Or a unit they had marked as destroyed turned out to have been a decoy constructed from agricultural equipment and thermal reflective sheeting by a logistics battalion in northern Germany that had apparently run out of patience and decided to get creative. The answer, when it finally arrived, which was more than we thought. Veth Karal sat with that answer for a long time. Outside his command ship, through the viewport, he could see the lights of Earth's cities, still burning, still running. A species that had been under orbital threat for 3 weeks and was still running its power grid, still moving its trains, still keeping its hospitals lit, with a stubbornness that he found, for the first time since making contact, not amusing, troubling. He thought about the tank he had watched fire at the ceremony. The percussion it made, the way the crew had not flinched from their own weapon, standing in that noise, in that concussive blast, like it was just Tuesday. He thought about the general standing beside him, the one who had said nothing. He started writing a different kind of report. The battle for the Korean peninsula began in the 47th day of the Conclave ground campaign, and it ended the idea of a short war the way a river ends a drought, completely, permanently, and without any particular ceremony about it. High Command had chosen Korea for the third landing wave because the terrain assessment called it controllable, peninsular geography, limited lateral escape routes, urban density that could be exploited for target concentration, rivers running high, yes, but crossable with the bridge-laying capacity of a Conclave engineering division. And the logic was clean. Box the armor in. Force a decisive engagement. End the campaign before the political cost at home became a problem, because the Conclave's member species were watching this campaign the way people watch a fight they expected to be over in 30 seconds that has now entered its 7th minute, with expressions that had shifted from bored confidence to something they did not want to name. What the terrain assessment had not adequately modeled was what happens when the humans who know that terrain have had 47 days to prepare it. 47 days is enough time to move a great deal of Earth. 47 days is enough time to dig tank firing positions into hillsides at angles that give overlapping fields of fire into every viable approach corridor, with overhead cover thick enough to defeat anything short of a direct energy strike. The inside towns and villages and industrial areas where a direct energy strike required a judge advocate's authorization that took 11 hours minimum. 47 days is enough time to route a division's worth of Abrams through road networks that look, from orbit, like civilian logistics traffic, because they are civilian logistics traffic, mixed deliberately and methodically with military convoys in a way that the Conclave's targeting protocols were specifically forbidden to engage without positive military identification. 47 days is enough time for the humans to get angry. Not the generals, not the commanders in their bunkers with their paper maps and their cold coffee, the people, and the ones who had spent a month and a half watching alien ships sit in orbit above their homes like a bad weather system that had decided to become permanent. The ones who had watched their cities go to blackout protocols and their children go to emergency shelters and their lives get reorganized around the specific inconvenience of being invaded by a civilization that had shown up assuming it was doing them a favor. They were not grateful. A species that has been condescended to for its entire first contact experience and then invaded does not fight the way a species fights when it's defending something abstract. It fights the way it fights when it's defending something personal. The Conclave's tactical models included cultural aggression indices, morale variables, resistance coefficient calculations built from the behavioral profiles of 41 previous species. None of those species had fought like this. And the models said resistance should be declining by now. Attrition should be accumulating. Morale should be degrading as civilian cost mounted. The models were wrong in a way that Veth Karal's analysts could not fully explain, except by flagging the cultural notes they had collected in the first contact period and had filed under interesting curiosities, and then later were refiled under catastrophic intelligence failure. The note read, The humans have a documented cultural tradition of performing better under pressure than they do under normal conditions. Their historical military record shows a consistent pattern of early reversal, followed by sustained escalation. Recommend further study. Recommend further study. The Third Wave's lead armored unit crossed the Imjin River at 0200 hours on a Wednesday in darkness, or in the kind of rain that turns every electronic system into a philosophical question about whether it ever really worked, and met the 1st Battalion 72nd Armor, United States Army, in a battle that lasted 11 hours and produced a volume of after-action reporting that military historians would spend decades working through. The Conclave armor, grav-suspended platforms, energy weapons, automated targeting. No biological crew element because Conclave doctrine had phased out crew-served vehicles in favor of autonomous systems 80 years ago. Engaged at maximum effective range the moment the Abrams muzzle flashes gave away their positions. The Abrams did not stop firing because they were being engaged. This was the part of the battle that became later the most studied, the most referenced, the most cited in the subsequent military doctrinal revisions that spread through the Conclave's defense establishment like a slow, uncomfortable realization. The human crews continued fighting while being fired on. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Every autonomous combat system the Conclave used was built around an optimization function that included self-preservation as a weighted variable. When an autonomous platform came under effective fire, it retreated, regrouped, or requested support, because those responses produced better long-term combat efficiency than absorbing punishment. The math was clear. You did not fight through fire. You fought around it, or you withdrew to fight again from a better position. Any system that didn't do this was a system that got destroyed, and destroyed systems didn't win campaigns. The Abrams crews knew they were being hit. They stayed, not because they were not afraid, not because the armor made them invulnerable. It did not. 2 tanks from the 1st Battalion 72nd were destroyed in the first 90 minutes of the engagement, their crews killed instantly, and the remaining crews knew this because they were talking to each other on the radio, and the radio went quiet in a particular way that every tanker understands immediately and with complete clarity. They stayed because of something the Conclave's cultural analysts had cataloged, filed, found interesting, and then failed to weight correctly in any of their combat models. They had been trained for this, not trained as in briefed, not trained as in told what to do, trained as in the kind of training that takes a human being who is reasonably brave under normal circumstances and produces, after years of repetition and escalating difficulty and the specific institutional violence of a military education, ain't a person who performs their job functions correctly when every neuron in their body is telling them to stop, because the habit of the job is deeper than the fear of the moment. Because the thing they were trained to do is more automatic than the thing their fear tells them to do. Because when the Conclave round hit the tank hull, and the crew heard it and felt it, and the commander's first instinct was to move, and his hand was already on the radio, and his mouth was already giving Adayenka the next target, and his body was already doing the job before his brain had finished processing the fear. Veth Corral watched the battle data in real time from his command ship and felt something he had not felt in 43 years of interstellar diplomatic and military service. He felt outclassed. Not technologically. He was not outclassed technologically. His weapons were better, his sensors were better, his orbital fire platforms were better, his energy weapons were better. His grav platforms were more mobile, more survivable under standard conditions, more precise, more maintainable, more scalable. He was, by every metric his civilization used to measure military capability, fighting a vastly inferior opponent. He was losing. But not in the sense that he was going to be defeated today, or this week, or this campaign. He had enough firepower in orbit to end this planet's capacity for organized resistance in a matter of hours if he was willing to accept the political consequences, which he was not, which the humanitarian conduct protocols prevented, which was, he understood now, and with the specific clarity of a person who has been outmaneuvered long before they realized a game was being played, exactly what the humans had calculated. They had known about the protocols. They had studied conclave law the moment contact was made. They had structured their entire ground defense around the assumption that he would not use his orbital weapons freely, that he would be forced to fight a ground campaign, that the ground campaign would be on their terms, in their terrain. I'm in their conditions, in the mud and the rain and the complex urban environments that his autonomous systems were not optimized for, against opponents who did not optimize themselves, who had been told once, at the beginning, that their weapons were toys, who had taken that assessment and filed it away and spent 11 months building a defense around the specific weaknesses it revealed, not in the tanks, but in the enemy's assumption that the tanks were the point. And the tanks were never the point. The point was 11 months of preparation. The point was the terrain. The point was the protocols. The point was a species that had spent its entire recorded history fighting things larger, better equipped, and more powerful than itself, and had developed, over that history, a very particular and very dangerous expertise in making that the enemy's problem. That Veth Karal filed his campaign suspension request to High Command on the 59th day of the engagement. He recommended immediate ceasefire negotiations. He attached his updated cultural assessment, which was now 47 pages long and had been reviewed by 6 different analysts, and had, in the margin of the final page, a handwritten note from his senior military advisor that said simply, "We should have read the history files." High Command approved the ceasefire request. A General Ose received the communication in her bunker in the Swiss Alps, still drinking coffee, still using a paper map. Her aide told her the conclave was requesting negotiations. She put her coffee down. She looked at the map for a long moment, at the positions marked on it, at the distances covered, at the cost, written in the margins in numbers she would not say out loud. "Tell them we're available Thursday," she said, "and tell them the meeting will be on the ground. Their ambassador comes to us." Veth Karal arrived for the negotiations on a Thursday in the rain, on the ground, at Andrews Air Force Base. There was no honor guard of tanks this time. The tarmac was empty. He stood in the rain for a moment before going inside. He looked at the empty tarmac for a long time. The absence of the tanks, he understood now, was not an oversight. It was a message. "We don't need to show you what we have anymore. You already know." Inside, General Ose was sitting across a table with her hands folded and a cup of coffee at her elbow, and an expression on her face that was not triumphant and not angry and not relieved, but was instead the face of a person who had known, from the moment she stood on a runway watching an alien dignitary clap at a tank, exactly how this was going to go. She waited for him to sit down. He sat. She slid a document across the table. The proposed terms, reasonable terms, not punitive. And not designed to humiliate, designed to work, the way all her plans were designed to work, practically, sustainably, with an eye toward the next problem on the horizon, which was not the conclave, and both of them knew it. He read the terms. He looked up at her. "You planned this from the beginning," he said. "The first contact, the honor guard, the ceremony." She said nothing. "You wanted us to underestimate you." She picked up her coffee, took a long drink, set it back down. "Oh, Ambassador," she said, "you did that all on your own." He signed the document. Outside, somewhere in the Ruhr corridor, in a drainage ditch that still smelled like diesel and cordite and 5 weeks of rain, a tank crew was eating hot food for the first time since the campaign started. Nobody was talking much. The loader had finally finished his ration bar. The gunner was asleep against the hull, using her helmet as a pillow. The commander was writing a letter home on actual paper. Because the field post was running again and paper didn't need a power source and some things you didn't want to trust to a network. The tank sat quiet in the ditch, rain beating off its hull, thermal signature cooling toward ambient, invisible to everything above it, still there, still ready, waiting for Thursday to mean what they hoped it meant, without quite letting themselves believe it yet, were the way soldiers learn not to believe good news until it has been good for longer than one morning. The loader pulled out a new ration bar, bit into it, stared at the sky. The conclave ships were still up there, but they were holding position, not maneuvering, not scanning, just sitting, the way ships sit when the people inside them have been told to wait. He chewed. "Think it's over?" he asked. The commander didn't look up from his letter. "Ask me Sunday," he said.